Good morning and welcome to episode 81 of the Coffee Squad podcast. Today, Jake and I are joined by Andy, and we are going to be discussing the importance of a good security plan, specifically the Las Vegas shooting. How you guys doing this morning?
Doing good.
Doing good, bud.
Good. Jake, I'll let you introduce Andy since you know him a little bit better. So take it away.
Yeah, so Andy is a 15-year Force Recon Marine. He's worked in over 60 countries, most of that time being 6 to 9 months a year for over 10 plus years, in a lot of high threat environments: Pakistan, Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan. I'm sure a few others too that are out there. So his role today, his role as a Marine Recon was special operations, diplomatic security, instructing and advising on special high threat humanitarian projects, securing terrorist defector and rehabilitation centers. So if you can imagine, pretty busy, and I think he's probably lined him up perfectly for what he does today. So he has 11 plus years developing and teaching specialized curriculum to government and private entities. Currently, he's an event security director, instructor, and close protection specialist. He plans overall security for large-scale festivals, sporting events, concerts, movie premieres, and convention support. He can conduct threat vulnerability assessments, assess physical security measures, train staff, review and advise on existing emergency action plans. Anyone who's been or worked with Andy like I have understands this. He's passionate about what he does and raising awareness to educate personnel industry-wide to provide a safer environment for everyone involved with practical and cost-effective methods. So Andy and I met through a mutual friend of ours, and also in the security industry. And I can tell you, without doing event security and learning and watching him work a very, very high profile event, definitely impressed. And he made it look so smooth and so easy. Just the questions he asked, the way he was looking at stuff. Definitely a great mentor and a great teacher, and just a great person to know. So really happy to have Andy on. And I think, the discussion of the Las Vegas shooting that we're going to discuss here today and why it's so important to have a plan, couldn't probably pick anyone better than having Andy on the show. So thanks, Andy, for joining us, and grateful that you took some time out of your day to join us and talk about this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's my pleasure. Appreciate you guys having me. Like, it's really important. Like, anything that I can pass on to people out there, I'm happy to do it because, there's a lot of people in the world doing events, and, we got to keep them safe.
Absolutely. I kind of butchered your bio there. Did I miss anything? And I know you've done a lot more talking with you.
It was pretty funny. It's a mouthful. No, you're all good. Just long story, Force Recon, then the contracting with WIPS, WPS with diplomatic security, agency contracting to, straight on my own. Had a security training company as well. And then the Somalia project was just independent, where I was a diplomat, and I got into the music event. Just like everybody out there, it's just who networking. You meet somebody, you just kind of go with the wind, and boom, I landed here. And it's been a blessing. So it's been kind of nice.
Yeah, let's talk about your event planning and what you do, the glamorous and maybe not the so glamorous side too,
Yeah, there's not, it's, there's some pluses and minuses, but, usually, as none of us here always beat our chest on where we've been or what we've done, but I think the intro is important just so people understand the perspective of how the Vegas shooting was seen through my eyes. Kind of points things out, used to do counter sniper stuff and sniper stuff, been shot at. So it's like all those things kind of factor into this incident, not something you normally talk about, but so I appreciate you bringing up the background because I think it's important for the audience.
Yeah. And I think you're, in the security world, people can have all different kinds of backgrounds, right? Yep. Whether you worked as a security guard and worked your way through the ranks, or you're a law enforcement officer, with that experience, or, military, it all sheds a light and gives credence to what you've done. So
Thanks.
Well, I think
absolutely.
I mean, doing some research for this episode, I was watching a interview with this security guard that was there, and he's talking about it's the first time he's ever been shot at, and he didn't really know how to react. He was scared. And I think that to kind of give your background, say, so you've been in that environment before, so you're going to react differently than somebody who's never been in that environment.
Yeah, and that's where part of it feels like a blessing. Like in hindsight, I'm glad I was there. And for the audience, like I was the security director for the Route 91 event on the Live Nation behalf. My counterpart was with the MGM. It was like a partnership. So I wrote the security plan. I hired all the security staff, and we did a lot of the coordinating. So with all that said, like the whole purpose where the background comes in is just there are individuals that have never been shot at, or they don't come from a police or military background, which is fine. Those folks are incredible. But just in this one particular incident, the perception of the chain of events that happened, like it's hard to explain, like the feedback of information I was receiving while the shooting was happening, knowing where the bullets are coming from, knowing when the rounds are close to you, they're not close to you, understanding like, gunshot wounds and first aid, and being the person that wrote the plan. What police are doing, what security's doing, what production's doing. And it's kind of like an overarching, knowledge or insight of what's happening in the moment. So that's why everything kind of fed into, a proper response, in my opinion. And the other thing is a lot of this is, online. You'll see videos, FBI, Sheriff Department investigations and after actions. With me, I was kept under the radar. I was involved in the lawsuit. I was retained as a member of counsel for Live Nation for the defense. So I pretty much laid low the entire time because, I had legal ramifications. But, a lot of that is like what happened in the moment from start of shooting till end of night. Police had their role. The FBI had their role. But what happened in the moment and who was moving casualties, that's a piece of the story that's missing.
Well, hopefully, today we're going to unravel, part of the story and really, talk about that lawsuit and why the success on your part of the lawsuit was because of the depth and the detail of the plan that you created, and why that's so important. Look, we've talked about this on the show, and we talk about due diligence, and whenever you hire anybody for anything or you go purchase something, to always do your due diligence. And I can't stress this enough with security. Know who you're getting, do your due diligence on them, and know what they bring to the table, their background. Like Andy said, that night, his background as a Marine recon, the way he was able to process the information, all of it in an extremely chaotic situation. He was able to do that because of his training and background as a Marine recon.
Yeah. I was just lucky in the sense that in 2016 to 2018, I was, every 2 months rotating into Somalia. I flew my own guns over. I was a diplomat, and I ran 3 terrorist effector centers. I had 90 of their NSA guys. So in 2017, my boss hired me and said, "You need to stop carrying a gun." And I said, "Great, you're right." And then I ended up, I had this festival, and the important thing is, long story short, is I had just come out of theater in Somalia, where your alertness, your skills are sharp. And I was doing a festival. I was in a different mindset. But when I heard the first round crack, it was an armor-piercing 7.62. Very familiar with that sound. It was a blessing because it snapped me and my mindset into a readiness state that just said, okay, I wasn't expecting that, but it gave me time to prep before he started like shooting because something was off. So there was a lot of factors that helped the response. But like you said, Jake, the good thing is, not more so like why the plan's important for legal ramifications, but for everyone out there, why a plan is so important that it just doesn't look good on paper, but it's functional. Like, you have to have a functional plan, and you have to kind of poke holes in it. A lot of security experts out there, they run venues, stadiums, arenas. They'll write a security plan, but it only takes you on their property and into the parking lots. But what they're not working with the locals, even fire departments and some police departments, they don't think outside the festival footprint. They don't think about corridors and getting emergency vehicles in. What's traffic going to look like? Do you have drawbridges? Are you going to stop those to get emergency vehicles in? They don't consider marshaling areas for off duties, because there's a lot of shootings like Parkland, the Vegas shooting, the airport shooting, where off duties come flying in with no control, and they're in plain clothes with guns. And they're not considering the fact that patrons aren't going to know their officers, and they're going to be calling 911 saying there's a shooter at this gate. And then that just adds to the deconfliction state for police and getting an all clear of a site where there's people bleeding and wounding, which that 1 hour could be life or death for somebody. So there's a million reasons why a good security plan is key. And if you write a good security plan, if you do, because there will be a legal after action, somebody will sue you. And for the people who sued, Live Nation, I didn't take it personal. My heart was out there for all the victims, but I understood, why they were. And I was like, okay, I get that. But the thing is, you're on the other end of it. You're trying to help these people, and then now you're part of the lawsuit trying to defend yourself and your actions. So, there's a lesson in knowing that if your plan's not good, you're going to go to court eventually, or a deposition, and that prosecutor is going to poke every little hole that they can in your life and in that document. And if you don't have a functional plan, you didn't think it through, you've got to be able to answer. So yeah, it's it in a nutshell.
I think he said, the legal thing is probably at the tail end, right? The most important part of the security plan is exactly what you talked about, of planning for the worst case scenario, which happened in your instance, and then the follow-on plans, the coordination, everything to save lives. And there's a lot of lives that were lost that day, a lot of injured people, but luckily, because of your plan and because of what you did and because of your training, you're able to save a lot of lives. And I guess if you don't mind, if you could kind of talk us through that evening of so kind of what happened, and each step of what you did and how that ended up saving more lives.
Sure. And just for everybody to know, I usually speak from the me and I perspective, but that's because that's my vision of what I saw. It's not taking away anything that anyone else did. It's just my story. That's why it's a lot of me and I. But the security plan itself, as a director, you have to write a security plan, and basically you have to coordinate with law enforcement, the local venue, everybody. So it's a collective effort, it's just you're steering the train to make sure all these pieces are in it. So police did their part. They were phenomenal. They had a phenomenal response. The MGM did their part. We worked together, and I was collecting all the information. MGM had some pieces in place. We talked about mass casualty. The venue created these mass casualty points. All that stuff gets incorporated. The police had a cordon plan. So planning wise, this is before any shootings really came on the radar. And our plan was 132 pages. It covered active shooter. It covered everything. And we actually briefed everyone. So, when the actions did happen, the response in my opinion, couldn't have been any better. And a lot of lives are saved, and I can go over that. So I just wanted to say that up front, like, it's a collective effort. So if I speak me and I, it's just because I'm about to just tell you my side of what happened on the ground. As far as what happened that night, it was 1 hour left till end of show. I remember high-fiving one of our production directors there, and best show ever, best weekend. And then I heard that loud crack. And, Jake, those sounds very well. You can distinguish different calibers if they're armor piercing or not. So the crack was a distinct 7.62 armor piercing round, and it just kind of like caught me off guard. You're out of mindset, you're not in your ready state, and then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, did I just hear that? Right. So then I got on the radio and I said to my MGM counterpart, Ken, did you hear that? And he said, yes. And I said, all right, stand by. Because there was 3 more cracks that went in another direction, and it was just crack, crack, crack. And the hyper processing, we all react differently, but I had a hyper processing of analysis, and I can actually talk through it because I remember it clearly. But it was like, was that a negligent discharge? Was that somebody drawing out a holster? Was that somebody shooting? This is Vegas. There's open gun carry. And I'm like, no, that was a 3-round burst. That's not normal. And and it was a rifle. So basically that's when I got on the radio immediately, and I triggered Ken. I was like, did you hear that? He said, roger that. I said, get ready. And then after that, there was a heavy burst of machine gun fire. And there's a good video from the New York Times called like 12 minutes of, I forget what it's called, but it's covers all 12 minutes of the shooting. But you'll hear that first initial gun burst. It was just the guns, no rounds cracking on us. So I got on the radio and I was like, Ken, you have an active shooter at Mandalay Bay or Luxor. There's no rounds on us. Right when I said that, the machine gun burst turned into bullet cracks coming onto stage. And then I was like, hey, Ken, disregard, we have an active shooter. So in the planning, I mean, when I explained our security plan was very detailed, it went all the way down to radio programming. So I always try to, we get our radios programmed. So that way, if you bottom out on one's area, it's medical, one up is security, one up is all call. And if you bottom out on the other end of the spectrum, it's, production for your lighting, your sound, all that stuff. So immediately after, they shot on us, I got on the all call, and I, in a calm voice, because calm breeds calm, fear breeds fear. I was like, all call. We have an active shooter. It's at Mandalay Bay. The shooter's in the North Tower. I need everybody to get into production. And if you're front of house, I need you to leave the venue. So it was like quick thinking. That's what came out of my mouth. And the thought process was, in the production area backstage, it's completely dark. This madman shooting from a Mandalay, he's focused on the people in the crowd, the thick bulk, so those people will be safe in the back. So as I was doing that, I ran onto the stage because he reloaded. And as I got on stage, I was trying to get the voice of God. And we have black scrim on the side of the stage between Mandalay Bay and us. And I remember he started shooting at the stage, and it was really close because I was getting bullet frag, which is from the copper cases. When they impact, they just the copper disintegrates. I was getting splashed with all that. So I knew it was right on me, and all I could do was just get small and say, fuck it. I'm either going to get it or I'm not. He can't see me, and I can't run, and it's all around me right now. So it was literally like a hail of heavy gunfire. Mm-hmm. And it was like, I wasn't scared, but I was pissed. That was the feeling I had. I was like, not my event. And I had to snap my head out of it and just process, okay, I don't have a gun. I can't shoot back. This is happening. I called the all call. What's next? And that's when I saw the crowd with white lights illuminating the kill zone. And this was on the initial volley, and that's standard practice. So, and I remember scanning the tower looking for the shooter. So I called the all call again, and I said, the shooter's definitely in the North Tower. I don't see muzzle flash. He must be shooting from a loophole, which in the end he was. He was set back in his room, sitting on his bed. And then from there, he stopped shooting, and I ran up, and I was trying to get the crowd to move. They were like a twister set, just covering the earth, laying on the ground with no piece of earth not covered. So if you're a shooter, the flat line distance was 360 to 450 yards to the people, but from the angle, it was a 250-yard shot. So it explained why I saw so many headshots, which, Jake, I'm sure when you go into theater and you're in a gunfight, you don't see a ton of headshots per se, unless you're doing CQB. But like, it was just really odd seeing all the headshots I saw. And I'm like, man, like processing, which I'll get into in a minute, was just odd, but it was because the distance was really point of aim, point of impact. So then he started shooting again, and he was going on the stage. And then I saw a few people get hit in the front and went to front of house. And that's when I was like, all right, I've done everything I can. Fuck it. The people is where I need to focus. I knew that I had the clarity that police were doing their cordon. Security was blowing open the gates. I killed the house lights because it was illuminating the kill zone. And then, I just ran into the crowd. And subconsciously, you can tell when the bullets are on you and when they're far away by the pitch, the sound, and the splash. So I was jumping into the crowd doing first aid. And I remember like, all right, there's too many people shot. I need to start recruiting. So on the ground, I started recruiting people that were semi-coherent, and just like any kind of training scenario where you give people cue cards that you're disoriented, you're angry, you're this. Every psychological effect was on that field, and you had to manage personalities. So what I did was I turned to recruiting people to start moving them to the mass casualty areas and to blow them out. So I had to create two lines of flow. And once I got the lemmings to move in one direction, they all started to follow. So one of the big cues in a security plan is just 80% of people are going to freeze, 10% are going to do the right thing, 10% are going to do the wrong thing. So you really have 10% doing the right thing and 10% canceling that out. So you have to kind of get a response and trigger people. So I started triggering people when I let them know the essay on where the shooter was. They thought they were on the ground because people aren't used to being shot at. So they thought the bullets going past were actually the shooter. So they all thought he was on top of them. So as soon as I started triggering, no, the shooter's in Mandalay Bay, you need to go out that way, they started running. And like I said, they're like lemmings, monkey see, monkey do. They all start moving. So if you look at the videos, about 3 minutes in, you start to see the crowd clear because they started getting essay on the situation. And then for the wounded, it was like patching holes from chest wounds, sucking chest wounds, like, headshots. Like, there was so many crazy different injuries. And the one I had trouble with was a perfect chest shot with no blood, no exit. And basically I asked the guy, I'm like, you all right, man? And he's just like, man, it hurts. I can't feel my legs. And I was like, bro, you might be very lucky because this is the worst area to get shot. But he had no bleeding, no blood out of his mouth. He was fine. He was breathing fine. He just couldn't feel his legs. I'm like, dude, you got lucky. So like there was all kinds of things. So basically I was managing the crisis zone because I knew also by writing the plan that, hey, police and medical standard response at the time is not to send anybody on the hot zone until the site's clear. And I knew that wasn't going to happen anytime soon. So that's where I focused all my time after that, was on my crew, the wounded, I was on the radio telling them to send all the medics to stage right, gate 7, set up a hasty triage area until the shooter stops, So then I started moving people that direction. But he kept shooting, and then he got close again. I had to dive over the barrier because it was really close. And basically when I did that, it was like more lemmings coming over the barricade and not being able to move because of the thrust in the stage. Pulled out a knife. I cut through the stage and bled everybody out to the other side. And, there's a lot of stories on the ground about the different wounded and everything. And, and I just remember going into the production trailer after things were kind of flowing and the shooter stopped. Like, it was the longest 10 minutes, but it's hard to explain to people because it wasn't difficult to track him because it was one guy shooting at us, not like 10 or 20 like we normally have. So it was very easy to just kind of move around him. But But, you know, and I remember checking on production and walking in trying to be all calm and just being like, hey, everything's okay. The shooting's over. You know, everyone calm down, and just trying to breed some calmness. But one of my friends, Lug, you know, tells me this day, he goes, dude, when you walked in, there's two things. A, the look on your face. B, you had blood all over you. And, you know, he was just like, and I remember you saying on the radio, you know, hasty triage area, stage right, gate 7. I need medics on the house right side. I don't have enough hands to plug all these holes. So I don't remember saying that, but he remembers it. But that was probably an honest assessment because there was a lot of people shot up on that field. So then it went from that stage to they finally cleared the site after an hour and 20 minutes. And then medics finally came on scene, and then, you know, it went through the rest of the process. But it's crazy because the one thing that I have no emotions, so to speak, about it. I don't, you know, I mean, I'm sad for everybody, but you know how some people have survivor guilt, some people kick themselves in the ass for not doing anything. There's literally nothing that I can sit back at and look and say, what could I have done better? Because there was a cordon plan and the police initiated. Boom. They locked down the 4 corners. They're on video pushing people out of the Vegas Boulevard exits because that's the hot side. The security guards are on video, and there's stories about them grabbing kids and shielding them as they're running out of the venue to get people to come with them. Like the production, the resilience of our team. You know, that's another thing. We're not used to that, but there's psychological first aid that needs to be administered at the end of these for life. And, you know, Jake and I and you, we get to experience that every day by having our messed up group chats of sadisticness and just kind of banter that just kind of somehow keeps us all straight. But these folks, it's a different world for them. You know, they don't come from our world. And I recognize that as well. And you have to think they were in a trailer while a masked gunman was just blazing away. And the psychological effect of being stuck in that trailer while this was all happening, I think about that all the time. And I'm like, man, it's a bell curve. We've seen some messed up stuff in our life, but they haven't. And, you know, that would mess anybody up. So I mean, like, your plan has to cover basically A to Z. Like, we had a cordon plan. So we had we had an egress plan. And, you know, when I went to court eventually, it was probably one of the most tedious, invasive processes of my life. Because they hired these investigative teams and they dug deep in my background to make sure I was of good character, because they basically explained prosecution, you know, they can be dirty and evil. They could call your family. They could interview people. They could dig deep in your childhood and try to find skeletons in your closet. So they did all that and ripped it apart and interviewed me for 8 hours plus a day and dug deep into my personal life. And it was, you know, after an incident like that, it's like, you know, I remember being very angry, like, why is this happening and why are these people doing this? And but in the end, I kind of get it, because if you're going to defend something, they could just tear you apart, take your whole thought process and kick it in the curb or in the trash. But like, you know, and then when it came to, you know, they always prep. They try to find their angle that you're most vulnerable and where they can attack you. So they tried to attack the house lights. Why was there shut off? And that was easy, you know, and that's where my background came in. And it's like, it's easy because I used to do sniper operations, direct action. So, you know, if you have to think in a bad guy's mind. And if I was the bad guy, I would be focused on that twister set of human carnage that I can just blaze away and hit anything just by spraying. Like, So I killed the house lights because it made it too easy for him. And plus, like I was saying, there were so many headshots. And when I was on the field doing first aid, some of the processing of knowing, you're trying to also identify how many shooters, what's going on. So there's no conspiracies. The shooting was very distinct from one angle. And I remember I was treating a 7.62 wound, then I was treating a 5.56 wound, and it was tripping me out because I'm like, there's one shooter. Why are there two different caliber wounds? And why isn't this gun melting down? He shot over 400 rounds, and M4 would just be done after that at that rate. And I was like, and then the shooting changed pitch. And I remember getting on the radio saying, Ken, and when I was on the radio, police was in the command post, and everything I was saying, we were giving instant essay to police, security, everybody in the command post. So I would go on the radio and be like, I think there might be two shooters because the shooting changed direction and pitch, and there's multiple gunshot or calibers. There's different caliber wounds on the ground. I'm seeing 7.62 and 5.56, but it's one shooter talking guns. Like there's only one gun going off at a time. That's why but then it makes sense that he had two windows that he was shooting from, and he had like over 15 or 20 guns in his room, and he had tons of ammunition. So it all makes sense now. But I do remember like processing, why is it 7.62? Why is it 5.56? But like, and also I just saw so many head wounds, and I was just like, this is bizarre. This is not normal. And, it's just, it was strange. But yeah, your documents they're going to rip it apart, even our security vendor was National Safety Act certified and accredited, which is the highest rating. And they basically, an act of terror happens. If they deem it so, then there's an umbrella of coverage where the government will help out. So even in court, I outlined what their roles and responsibilities were, and I was able to defend and say, yes, this is their roles and responsibilities, and match it up with the Safety Act. And then the judge even questioned during the depositions or in court. I wasn't in court, but basically said, I see it written, I see what the Safety Act is, but did they do that? And I remember the attorneys not really understanding security, so they couldn't really answer it. So I had to kind of help them and give them the tools to define how they did do it. And but it was amazing. It doesn't matter how good a plan is. It doesn't matter if you have the best insurance coverage in the world. It doesn't matter if you're Safety Act certified. It's like anything. When you sign a waiver, it doesn't mean you waive all your rights. There's always a hole that somebody could pierce, and that's what they tried to do really hard. So in the end, they ended up dismissing Live Nation and CSC, the security company, from the lawsuit because they realized, well, we're not going to get much progress here, so we'll shift it to the MGM. That's our best chance. And that's how lawsuits go, and they ended up settling for somewhere around $800 million for a class action. So yeah.
Thank you. I think those of us, and even if I only can speak from my experience through my lens, as you're talking, and you're talking about the wounds and your process and everything going on, the clarity. And I think a lot of people, can't really understand that unless they've been in those situations multiple times and understand, when chaos happens, when you've been in it quite a bit, your thought process, everything kind of slows down. It's weird. And the clarity that you remember things and that you're doing things. It's like someone hits that stopwatch almost, and it's slow-mo and it's super slow and pausing. Yeah. And honestly, I think you had the plan, everything was in place, but when bad actors want to do something, they're going to do it. Unless, they get caught in the process of doing it. You can't, I think Mike Tyson says it best. A plan only survives the first punch. And I think, your plan definitely survived. it definitely helped. And your actions and the actions of your crew and people there saved so many lives. And so that to me is commendable. I think
we actually did. I had an active shooter because I paid attention. Right, we come from our world. You know, I always say where there's a will, there's a way. That's the phrase I always use. If you study attacks around the world, there's knife attacks where 121 people stabbed or killed in the Tokyo subway, gas attacks, vehicle rammings. Like literally in our industry, you can predict patterns of badness. So just trace what's happening around the world. DHS at the time had put out notice that they had intel that terrorists were targeting events. So I took it serious and I put in an active shooter plan in our plan, and we actually briefed all our staff. And that's also a huge component. Like plans are only as good as they're communicated. They look good on paper, but are you doing an all hands brief? Are you briefing all your leadership? Are you telling them what's in place? We did that on this one, and I had staff members come up and say, "Hey, I remember you told me that bullets go through walls." So I pushed everybody to the back corner. Like they all retain something, so for sure, where there's a will, there's definitely a way. It's just amazing. And the plan did survive, but that's because the threat's real. You hope it may never happen, but if it ever does, I mean, it's a mess.
I think you said a key point there was you listened to DHS, you did your research, right? You went out, you did that research, and that information that you got, you incorporated into your plan. I see a lot of people, a lot of organizations that I call it the check the box issue. And it's like they have this sheet and they go down like check, 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 check. And it's okay. But you're really not helping.
It's a good start.
Yeah, you're really not helping anybody. And so doing what you did, in my opinion, besides the lawsuit, you save lives, and that's what's at the end of the day. That's the most important thing is saving lives, and you can tell, talking to you and
the whole team. Like I said, that was the me and I perspective. But I remember the security director of the security event manager who had the security company. I remember seeing him on the field, moving people to where they needed to. He stayed to the end. I remember the MGM team of the festival village just pushing people to the casualty points, breaking out, casualty tags and marking people by priority. I just remember seeing everybody doing their part. And that's what made me happy, because police did their part, security did theirs, the MGM did theirs, our production did theirs. And it was like, it just, boom. It was almost like, wow, is this really happening? And what people don't realize is there's 400 people shot plus 59 died. But if we were in a small town, country, city, or whatever, the casualties would have been a lot higher, because I have two close friends. One of them was a sheriff who was shot in the hip. The 223 went across his pelvis and into his other side. And his wife put on a waist tourniquet. She knew about waist tourniquets, which I never heard of. And long story short, he was in the hospital. 2 hours later, the nurse gave him 2 units of blood and his face turned color. He ended up having a severed femoral, and he lived for 2 hours, and they fixed it in 38 units of blood, 2.5 humans worth of blood. They saved his life. My friend Christy, I have a graphic picture. She was shot in the head, and it came out here, and it was like a horn. And I remember checking her, and I had to prioritize, and I'm like, I don't think she's going to make it. And I moved on. But when the medics came on the field an hour and 20 minutes later, I rechecked everybody, and she had a pulse, and we got her out of there. But she sent me pictures where literally you wouldn't believe it unless you saw it. But the top of her skull and this whole portion was just off. Her whole head was like caved in because they removed it. Mm-hmm. And then they reconstructed it, and she looks great today. But I always look back at those 2 wounds and I say, man, how many people would have died? If we weren't in Vegas, they had the medical. there's some after actions on what the medical facility did, and it's a good read, because this doctor prioritized casualties by wound, set them in the hallway. The doctors had 3-4 patients in one room with the same wound, because they made it work. It was just crazy,
Yeah, a lot of heroes that day. I remember I was sitting in the hospital, reading and seeing this come across the news, and to an earlier point you made, it still affects you. It still affects every single person involved.
Yep.
What happened that night, that travesty that happened that night. You and I and others like us, we deal with it in a way that most people don't understand. They probably think it's crude, but it's our way of dealing with it. And luckily, fortunately, we've been trained enough. Not to say that we have armor-piercing skin and like armor-piercing emotions. You still have emotions, but the other people, the family members who lost loved ones, who the wounded, and even if you weren't wounded, being in a fishbowl like that, getting shot at by a madman with hundreds of rounds raining down on you, psychologically, I don't care who you are. I remember the first time I got shot at, I tried to get small like an ant, and I always try to say that the best way I can picture this to people who've never been shot at is, the movie Black Hawk Down, when the Rangers are going through the alleyway and they get shot at, and their commander, they're looking at them like, hey, we're getting shot at, and he looks at me, he's like, okay, we'll shoot back. That cool, calm collectedness, right? I remember first time getting shot at, I'm small on the ground. I look up at one of my teammates, senior guy, and he's like, what are you doing down there? And then, luckily due to experience and stuff and turning that around, you do the same thing. And again, I can't applaud you and your teammates and everyone involved in that for having a detailed plan that survived beyond the first punch.
Calm breeds calm, fear breeds fear. I mean, I have stories of managing the folks on the field, and you have to turn the switch. But I had a guy that was just hysterical after I calmed down the entire bus, and he came on the bus hysterical, like, people are dying. I remember throwing him against the wall and saying, shut the fuck up. You need to, I don't care who you are, where you're coming. If you act like this, you're off this bus. You go find a place to stay. And then he calmed down, and then I did psychological first aid. I was like, look, buddy, calm down. You didn't do this. You're freaking everybody else on the bus. He's like, I get it. So I calmed him down, and calm breeds calm. It really does. If you're hysterical, everybody's going to be hysterical. The heroes, literally, I give it to the patrons. The expediency of hasty tools. They were using bike rack as stretchers. They were throwing people in those garbage bins you roll, 8 to 10 bodies to get them to the casualty area. They were resilient. They were a bunch of former military, active military, former, active FBI guys, fire department, police, good old boys. They rose to the occasion. And if it wasn't for the patrons on the field that day, I don't know what would have happened or how many people would be dead. But there's nothing, you just know that the SOPs for law enforcement and medical is they don't go in a hot zone until the site's all clear. So they literally fended for themselves. They took it, they did it. And honestly, living through something like that, I don't think I've ever been prouder of how people handled things. It was just definitely an interesting thing. But I will say to everybody, if you're going to write a security plan, make sure it's functional. There's a site I have that is on a peninsula with one way in and out, and it's thinking outside the box. I'm like, great. So if something happens, these 25,000 people, we have mass casualty, how are we getting people out? They're like, oh, we're just going to drive in on the one road and bring all our responders in. I'm like, you got people, you got drawbridges on each side, and you have traffic, you're not going to get anybody in. And he's like, shit. And then I brought up that we had water taxis, and basically there's a fire station across the street from the site. Why can't we load victims into water taxis and taxi them up the canal and do a pickup point somewhere where there's less traffic? He's like, Yeah, that's a great idea. So when I work with these law enforcement agents, they're awesome and they're open. So their new SOP is for any mass event on that canal, they're just call the taxi, they dump all their patrons, and then they go to the rescue. But that's the type of outside the box thinking. That's the type of functional planning that people need to really do. Like, great, you have a great plan around your festival, but if something catastrophic happens, you're not going to move people, you're not going to be able to get them out, people are going to bleed out. Like, it comes to that. And also when police are planning where their snipers go, they in the beginning always wanted them on rooftops looking down, but I'm like, great, but if he's like Paddock and he's in a loophole sitting back in the room, you'll never see him. You need to have a couple teams. It's not a lot of manpower. They need to be mobile because they also want to put them in a tower. I'm like, I can evade your tower and then you'll never see me. And then what are you going to do? So they make them mobile, and I help them kind of figure out shooting platforms like those sea containers, concession areas. I'm like, drop a ladder behind each of these. If something happens, throw that ladder up in your best vantage point. Like, that's functional planning, you know? I can't stress that enough. Like you said, Jake, there's a lot of companies that do the check in the box. It's a great start, but they never go back. It just sits in a safe and it doesn't get disseminated. Something ever happens, everyone's going to be lost. And security's first answer is, what are you going to do if an active shooter happens? I'm going to sit there and I'm going to open the door and I'm going to wait for, the command post to tell me what actions I need to take. I'm like, great. Guess what? It's going to take them about 5 minutes to figure out what's happening, get SA on the situation, and you're going to need to do something in the meantime. So you need to have your shit together and you need to have a plan in your back pocket so you're not going to freeze.
I mean, you bring up tons and tons of good points. Response time, that's something I tell every client. I don't care, if you're doing an event, a music event, a huge event, or if you're just doing a security assessment of a building. Understand or know what the response times are, and don't hope for the best response time. Always plan for the worst response time, and then you can set up your actions to that. And I think you knowing that and disseminating that information out, and knowing that in the back of your head of, hey, it's going to take Las Vegas PD X amount of time to get here, EMS X amount of time to get here. Plus, they're not going to actively go into the active shooter situation.
Doesn't matter how fast they get there; they're not going in. So,
and so understanding that, again, man, I two things, knowing you and getting to know you. Never would have known about you in this incident if it wasn't for Paul telling me about it. You keep a lot of stuff just, you would never know. You're just an unassuming guy, and you do what you do. And so your professionalism, I think, is the takeaway of all of this is, if you're going to be a security professional, be a security professional. And there isn't anyone, in my opinion, if you're in the event security, to look up to and get lessons learned than coming from you. So
I appreciate that.
Thanks for sharing your story. And thanks to all the first responders, to every patron out there that responded that day that saved so many lives. So,
and the crew and everybody, like, it was a collective effort. It was just, I'm impressed to this day how everything ended up moving. Like, you can Google police scanner communications. It's impressive. You can Google like reports on it. Like, everybody did their part, and it was just, we were lucky that our response was what it was at the time, before it came on everybody's radar as heavy as it did after the shooting. And it's funny, people always ask, well, what are you doing now versus what you did then? I'm like, literally, I haven't changed a thing in my process, because I did everything back then. And basically, there's really no way. The only improvement I have is we're now making walk-in videos to alert people of where the exits are a couple times before the show really kicks off, because we're trying to be proactive about triggering a response for the patrons so they don't freeze like they did in Vegas. When something happens, they know where to go. Because most patrons know the way they came in. That's the only way they know how to get out. So that's the only thing that I think we've improved on, is just pre-messaging patrons that, hey, there's more exits than the one you just came in. Pay attention to where they are. And I think that's extremely helpful too.
Awesome. Will, you got anything?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to think about. One thing I took away is how important the interagency planning and communication is. How important that talking to the police department, the EMS, the event security, how important that communication is, right? I do have a question. I mean,
well,
I guess you really can't.
On that real quick?
Of course,
that's really important. Unified command centers. I had one. They're really essential. The hardest thing is when you do an event, police are in their world, fire's in their world, the event promoters in their world, the venue in theirs. You have to get them together. You have to almost force feed it. And then I'm unlucky enough to have gone through the Vegas thing where when it gets hard to pull them together, I'm like, look, guys, I mean, I lived through this many people getting shot and wounded. I know what can happen. Like, I think it's a good idea for you. And I usually sometimes use a tactic where I'm just like, okay, if you don't want to meet, I just need to make a note because I lived through this, and I get to use that, and it usually turns a response. But it's so hard to get them together. But the police need to know what you're doing. They don't know that you have a capability of an all call that can reach out to 2,000 staff that'll trigger a response even quicker. So I'm glad you brought that up. That is huge. It's essential.
One other thing is, I know you can't really plan for how people react because, people are people. You call them lemmings, you have that thing. But I think the chaos and the way they reacted went to how a lot of the conspiracy theories were bred out of this event. Is there something that you do differently now to kind of prepare for how the people react, or are you just kind of going with the way you're still doing it?
Yeah, like I mentioned a minute ago, I was mentioning how we pre-message patrons.
Yeah.
When I say lemmings, it's because like once one does it, the next one goes, and all of a sudden the wave moves. But basically, we try to, because festivals are unique events. They're not a fixed venue like a stadium. So we actually create custom videos and messages that within the first 3 hours, you might have seen it 3 times that says, welcome to our festival. Please pay attention in case you have to evacuate, that this is where the exits are. We just try to pre-trigger people and let them know that they have other outs of the venue and to pay attention real quick and then go back to enjoying themselves.
Yeah.
That helps a ton because they're not just going to freeze and say, where do I go?
I think that's a good point because people do, when they react, they go to where they're known, where they perceive as safe. So if that was the way they came in, that's the way they want to go out. You think of like an airplane, they're always telling you, hey, the exit might be behind you, pay attention, right?
Yeah. So that's the typical response of a patron, is they're coming to enjoy themselves. They're not thinking about anything else. And they only know the way they come in. And like Jake can, we can talk about response. They always talk fight or flight. Well, I can tell you that I've never responded the same. There is no standard way that the human body will respond. Like, I've frozen, I've reacted good, I've seen everything in fast motion, slow motion. What I've learned is your response is based off your readiness. So if you're not prepared and you don't have a pre-thought in your head of where to go, you're going to freeze. I'll just tell you that straight up, because in the moment, under stress, when your body does all that crazy stuff, your brain doesn't think rationally. What it does is go into survival mode and pulls past thought and knowledge. So, to get a good response, it's based on your readiness. And that's why people have to be in the game if they're working in this industry. Otherwise, you're going to freeze.
Yeah. You talked about interagency planning, and watching you do that, is definitely impressive. Actually, we were teaching a course last week with some of the guys, and I didn't use your name, but I used your example of, hey, watching you go into someone's house, right? Whether it's a music hall or an arena or something else, it's their house at the end of the day. The security professional and the management there, they have their set of standards and procedures that they want and that they adhere to, and they want you to adhere to. Same with the local law enforcement in that area and the first responders. And watching you kind of bridge that gap where I've seen other people totally screw that up. Do you know who I am? Do you know who I represent? That ego that I've seen. If I can, besides everything we've talked about, is if you're a security professional going out and doing this stuff, again, Annie, I think is a phenomenal example of, tactics and techniques that you should use, of being accommodating to them, understanding what their roles and procedures are, and then how, your job, how you can add to that. I think there's a good mentorship for others out there that to show the right way and how to do things and build that interagency communication with interagency planning as well.
Yeah, that's it. It's their house. It's their city. We're always guests, and you have to kind of manage the different personalities. Some people are resistive, some people aren't, but you really have to figure out the end state of how you can achieve your job. Sometimes you have to give, sometimes you have to take, pick your battles. But, doing nothing is, negligent in my book. It's like being a police officer. It only takes one incident where it could be endgame. And, I always tell my law enforcement friends, just be ready, because hope you never have to draw your gun or do anything, but it's that one time that could end your life. So you have to treat every incident as if it's going to be that one time, and you got to have fun doing it. So,
yeah, I think that's the hardest part of kind of getting people to think like that, because we've all seen evil. And anybody who's been born after or prior to 9/11 that can recall, they've seen evil. Anybody who remembers this has seen a form of evil. We've been in it a little closer because of our past jobs and stuff, but I think it's hard to get people to recognize that there is evil out there. It can happen, and you have to be prepared. Not be paranoid, but be prepared.
Yeah,
exactly. That's why I said have fun. Like, that's a very important part. I'm glad you brought that up. I always preference, like, when I give a brief, I'm like, look, this is just the worst of it, but you always have to have a plan, put it in your back pocket. And I always try to motivate people that this isn't a work safety brief. This is a life safety brief, because next week you could be an attendee with your family. Mm-hmm. So, this is stuff that'll help you get your family out. And then I always say, this is the worst of it. You have to think about the worst. And then once you're done thinking about it, you'll have a preconditioned response in your back pocket that you can pull out. And then you can just kind of leave it in your back pocket and enjoy the rest of your night and have fun. That's a really important to say. Like, you can't run around saying, like, the world's going to end. You're all going to do this. Yeah. Like,
no one wants to hang out with you anyways. That way, like,
there are some security professionals that are like that, and I've seen it doesn't jive well with the promoters and the production people, because, they're sensitive individuals. They don't come from our world. So, you have to pick your battles.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you joining the show today. We had a great conversation. It was really interesting and endearing to hear your story and everything that you went through. So thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah.
Thanks, Andy, man.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to talk about or bring up before we leave?
Nope. I just appreciate it. That's all. And I hope it helps some people out there, and hope it motivates others. And, let's just keep doing our part to make everything better.
Right on.
Awesome.
Thanks, Andy. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. All right.
All right, guys.
Catch you guys next week.
All right. Later, guys.